So hello everyone, my name is Cynthia Stryker and I'm the Director of Marketing for Waterfield Technologies. Thank you all for joining us for a conversation today on voice-enabled chatbots and how they are helping businesses quickly serve customers and reduce cost. Today's panel is part of an ongoing series of discussions focused on solving today's contact center challenges through conversational AI and automated self-service. Waterfield Technologies is an enterprise software and consulting services firm serving organizations around the globe. With decades of industry experience, their technology offerings span the entire contact center, including customer experience, self-service automation and AI, workforce management, and contact center as a service. We're here today with our partner Streebo, a premier IBM business partner specializing in digital transformation solutions through interactive and intelligent virtual agents. So I'd like to introduce you guys to our two panelists, Mike Henches, VP of Product Innovation for Waterfield Technologies, and Mike Chu, Director of Solutions at Streebo.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
So we're going to go ahead and jump in and start with some of the questions that we've received leading up to today's event. But I do want to encourage everyone in the audience to use the Q&A feature to submit questions as we go along here. And we'll do our best to address as many of these in the time that we have here today. So I guess we'll kick things off with one of the questions that we saw come across most frequently here, which was really, what are some of the main considerations for businesses as they look to scale bots to an enterprise-capable solution?
Thanks, Cynthia. I guess I'll get started on that one. As we look at a lot of organizations that are introducing automation from the AI providers into the contact center, we see them struggling moving from proof of concepts, simple things that are trying out the technology that at first glance show promising results, and moving them into a full-featured enterprise-capable solution that can scale to a complex enterprise's demands. As part of that, there are components that need to fit in and around the automation environment that contact centers are used to. Detailed reporting and analytics, dashboards, components that give great visibility into how a bot is interacting with the customer base that's trying to use it, how well automation is working, or where is it struggling and needs improvement. Making sure the infrastructure and tooling is set up to have that information be visible and accessible to the enterprise is a key component that should be in any enterprise implementation. These are also 24/7 systems. Automation's great value is the fact that it can run whenever customers need it. And so making sure that the environment is up, it's scalable, it's fault tolerant, that it has the right alerting and monitoring components so that if there are difficulties within the environment, they're visible and can be easily reacted to, are components that need to be in there when these solutions get to scale. When you start relying on automation, you don't have human capital in behind it to handle the load. It's super important that these components work reliably, repeatedly, and satisfy those customer needs. And then kind of the last part is getting at real data. When you get past the frequently asked questions and kind of simple responses that can be self-contained within the environment, we need to get at customers' ERP and CRM systems, grabbing business data and getting that back in front of customers for self-service. That integration can be complex. There can be business rules that need to be in place. And so having a platform and an environment that's capable of pulling those components into the solution make the automation components much more functional for customers.
So how do businesses go about identifying and implementing, their first chatbot? What are some of the considerations that apply there?
Mike, let me take that one.
Sure.
So what we normally do is we look to identify areas that have repetitive interactions between humans. So typically with bots, your aim is to deflect human activity So looking for repetitive interactions between humans. Another area that we like to look at is just being aware and cognizant of the chatbot personality and the branding to make sure it is delivering the right kind of messaging and engaging the audience in the way that you want as an organization. Another consideration is, really just to start small, assess the effectiveness of the bot, and then expand from there. And probably most importantly, leveraging the right kind of tooling. So low-code tooling in our case to shorten the time to value and rapidly iterate and build from there.
Why is using AI or Watson critical to the success of a chatbot?
So it's really about the user experience and efficiency and effectiveness of communication. You want to have the bot be able to understand utterances in natural language and also extract entities for context. So for example, when a customer wants to open a savings account, the bot doesn't ask what kind of account they want to open. Also, classification of task or problem for more efficient handling or routing. So you want to route the conversation to the right bot to provide targeted solution or problem resolution. You also want to have sentiment analysis to improve the quality of the experience and engagement, which means that the bot can understand how the person is feeling and if they're frustrated or if they're unhappy, handle the conversation in a different way. Also, in the world of globalization, you want to be able to enable two-way multilingual communication so that you can address as much of the audience as you can.
So how do voice-enabled chatbots, how do these differ from what we see in traditional IVR type applications?
Traditional IVRs are very scripted and methodical. They're linear in process. I ask a question, and then following up, and I'm running through a static list of components. We see bot platforms opening up the conversation into a much more natural interaction with the end user. I can ask more open-ended questions. How can I help you today? And respond to those, capture the caller's intent, the reason for their call, the reason for their question, in a much more natural way than running through a list of options for them to choose from. Also, when I'm collecting information from callers, the environments allow a much more natural way of getting the data from the caller into the system. I can provide multiple pieces of data at once. I want to fly from San Francisco to LA on August 3rd. We can present all that information in a single interaction with the caller in a natural way. It's how we would communicate to another person. And these AI environments can pick apart and grab the individual data elements out of that piece and use them without having to re-ask the question. Oh, okay, I understand you want a new travel. Where you want to travel from would be a typical IVR style interaction where it's picking up one piece of information at a time and moving forward. Whereas our AI solutions are much more dynamic and can grab multiple pieces of data and have a much more natural interaction, fill in just the missing part of that equation. So I'm not in a linear flow. I'm more reacting to the caller and providing a more natural experience. So AI-enabled voice solutions provide an order of magnitude better interaction with customers than a traditional speech IVR application would, and they're way better than an archaic DTMF interface.
Mike Hinchis, this might be another good one for you to tackle here for us, but there's a question around how do cloud-based bots integrate with existing CRM or back office contact center technologies? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that enterprise solutions need to do enterprise-capable tasks. So getting at business data is a critical part of being able to give the automation environment real information to satisfy customer questions. A lot of customers today are moving their CRM applications up into the cloud. Platforms like Salesforce are already cloud enabled, so a cloud-to-cloud communication piece is a fairly natural component. But there's still a lot of business data that's within the customers' environments within the premise walls, firewalled off in a secure place, and getting from automation components that are cloud-based to connecting to that data can be a little challenging on just getting the plumbing connected, plus making sure that we're following the business rules and other components correctly. You know, our teams are well versed in consuming and using that data from a voice interaction standpoint and running those business transactions. Um, when we connect to cloud components, we're either putting integration components within customers' environments to help publish that information in a safe and secure way, or we're bringing cloud components in and leveraging customer RESTful API endpoints with site-to-site VPN, secure tunneling for communication components, and making sure we can get at the data in a safe and traceable way so that we know exactly what information is going to which customer.
So $1 million question here. How quickly can these bots be implemented?
In the old days, it would take, months sometimes to stand up a bot. It's, a fairly complex process of integrating the backend systems, developing the dialogues, the type of interactions you want to have with your audience. And there's the manual coding, right, of the front ends and the back ends and even the business logic itself. So thankfully, there are no-code tooling solutions like Streebo that enable a bot to be built in a matter of days, maybe weeks, maybe even months. It really depends on the scope and complexity of the solution. And that's why we say, start small and then build, expand, and adjust from there.
So no hard, fast rule here as to how quickly they can be put into place. It sounds like it's pretty dynamic based on the need.
Yeah, Cynthia, I guess I'll add on to that. Simple things can go fast. When I'm self-contained, my response is completely tied to what the question is, frequently asked questions types components. Integration takes time though. But like Mike said, getting business benefit out of simple solutions quickly so that you get experience, you understand exactly what callers are asking for, even if you're handing those to agents to start with. You can then iterate and put automation in place once you know that you've got a solid understanding of the exact questions and needs that callers come into the solution with. So putting something up quickly that answers a few questions, but then is just routing to agents is a great way of collecting solid, measurable interactions that help you understand what to build out from an automation standpoint correctly. You don't want to spend 3 months building something and then find out that nobody uses it. So that iterative approach, collecting feedback as you go along, can really help get things in quickly, but then expand and add more functionality over time and become more valuable to the enterprise.
So you mentioned measurable results there. What are some of the impacts that businesses can expect to realize when they implement a chatbot?
Yeah, we're seeing very solid, tangible business benefits that come out of applying these automated solutions into the contact center. The traditional ROI of self-service, being able to completely respond to a customer's inquiry without having a human interact is a tremendous cost savings to the enterprise. We have 24/7 complete visibility, and then automating components mean less human capital is required to do the same task. Pulling routine and simple transactions out of the contact center is also beneficial for agent productivity and value. Agents are happier when they're solving customer problems that require them to think a little bit. Remotely doing the same thing over and over again isn't very satisfying for an agent either. So these are great candidates for automated components, and customers have realized tremendous benefits in being able to serve customers with less expense, a huge cost savings, as well as decrease agent turnover and increase agent satisfaction as well, because agents are working on things that are more appropriate for them and useful for them to do. So kind of a dual benefit. Plus, when you look at AI components as a compared to kind of traditional automation, touch tone based systems, for example. Customers are much more engaged and happy to use automation when it's a better experience. So we see customer satisfaction scores, things measured like NPS scoring, um, the net promoter score increases. Customers like the systems better. They have a more favorable view of the enterprise when an intelligent automation component is available for them to use instead of an old-fashioned touchtone system. They perceive that company as more advanced and more attuned to their needs. I can talk to my refrigerator and order new supplies to it. It's Alexa enabled, but I'm pressing 3 to talk to a customer service agent when I call some customers. That voice experience has really reset customer expectations to the point where enabling natural-based interfaces, the same kinds of interactions that consumers are using with GPS systems in their cars, Alexa or Google Home-based appliances within their environment, extends into contact center interactions in the same way. So cost savings, automating calls that couldn't be automated before, or having customers more happy to use automation and so they stay in the platform better, give very tangible ROIs. Agents are happier because they're not dealing with routine and simple interactions. They're doing things that are more complex and challenging and rewarding. And then you've got just the customer perception, better customer experience, better customers are happy, and they view the enterprise more favorably as a result of being able to interact in a much better way.
So you talked there a little bit about some of the customer implementations and the way that we're seeing these chatbots used. Can you share a few examples of some of the implementations that you've completed?
Sure. So in terms of chatbot implementations, one customer of IBM is Bradesco, which is a major bank in Brazil with about 65 million customers. So as a bank, especially large ones, they tend to have a lot of products and services. And training and quality and consistency of service becomes a challenge. So branch employees, when they're not familiar with a product or service, they need to call the central office for product and service questions. So what IBM and Watson did was they trained on 62 products and answers, and currently answer 283,000 questions per month with a 95% accuracy rate. Response times have been reduced from 10 minutes to seconds. And bank reps now are able to focus on the quality of the interactions that they have with the customers rather than answering repetitive questions.
Another project that we're implementing right now is for an online retailer. You traditional order a product online component and order status. Wismo, what's the status of my order? Is a great automation example where we can collect information from callers, can identify easily what they're calling about, leverage back-end systems, interactions, dates of shipments, information from carriers, pull that all together for the bot so we can provide a better answer to the caller about where their package is or where their shipment is or why only half of it showed up today. So that kind of an interaction, collecting information from callers, finding their transactions, getting them up-to-date status has worked really well. We're implementing that kind of a solution on both voice and chat simultaneously. So we're ensuring that no matter how customers come in and ask those questions, they're getting the same answer independent of the channel. Consolidating business rules and backend integration components allow us to have a second channel available for customers and a very easy and natural extension to the project. It wasn't a whole other implementations to do. So getting kind of the core components, getting backend integrations and those pieces put together and putting together purpose-built front-end components that sit side by side, that leverage a lot of the same information has given us an economy of scale to deliver both solutions at much less cost than if they'd been each implemented independently.
So you talked there, Mike, a little bit about the back end systems, and there's a question here from the audience where they're curious about what type of data do you use when you're creating a bot? Like, what type of data is necessary to drive the interactions?
Yeah, so there's basically two different kinds of data that get pulled into defining an automation environment. The first is, what do customers ask for? What are their questions? What information do they want and need? We look at information there about what are humans doing today. So in a web chat environment, that's looking at chat transcripts, pulling out what are customers inputting in and what kind of information is going back and forth with the real human agent. That provides a great environment to go pull from to figure out what should be automated and how do I need to categorize inbound requests. As part of that, when we see those requests, I need to know what the status of my order is. Where's the other half of my shipment? We identify very quickly the kind of business data that's required to fulfill those requests. We then work with customers to go figure out how can I safely and effectively go find that information within the enterprise. We have security concerns. We need to authenticate and identify callers in a clear way to make sure they can have access to the right data, but then getting them the information that they need as quickly as we can past that. So connecting into enterprise backends, pulling that information together are great components. Usually contact centers know what customers do. And the 80-20 rule certainly applies here. 80% of the transactions are probably within a 20% of all of the data within the enterprise. It's important for automation components to really focus on those high value components first. Not try to build everything, but let's build solutions to the common questions, and let's leave the other stuff to agents. Really that decision point of what should automation do and where do I need to stop forcing automation and let a human take over is a very important consideration. I've seen too many times where customers are trying to do too much with automation, and I overload my caller. Especially in a voice environment, I can only hear and understand so many things at once. If it gets more complicated, I need to move to a different platform. I need to get into chat, into visual. I need to display information when it's more complicated. And so those are the kinds of components that we see. So we look for data that's easy to speak, easy for people to understand, that's summarized well for them. And if they have something more complicated, we're going to get them to a person to help them.
So just furthering on that a little bit, I imagine that there is some need here to maintain, to improve the bot based on its performance. How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one of the things you want to focus on is to understand how is your bot doing, right? So that includes looking at operational analytics, looking at the chat logs, as opportunities to understand where the NLP engine, natural language processing engine, needs to be tuned, needs to be retrained, where there are opportunities to add more intents. So being able to understand, different questions, different challenges, and then providing the sample questions that help the bot understand, okay, for these type of intents, these are the type of questions that are going to be asked, or examples of those kind of questions. You also want to be where the customer wants to be. So if it's, for example, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, the web, traditional web, or mobile app channels, you want to be able to extend your bot to where the customers are looking to interact with the organization. Going back to understanding how the bot is doing, you can also use CSAT surveys at the end of a chatbot conversation or bot conversation in general to be able to understand how the bot performed and where there are opportunities to improve as well, coming directly from the customer itself. And then finally, it's always good to just keep tabs on the competition. So see what they are doing with bots and how you can use that as inspiration for your own bot improvements.
are there special considerations when you start to take a look at, what's needed to connect like a text or a voice enabled bot to existing contact center solutions? Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet that businesses should consider?
Yeah, Cynthia, voice is different than text. You know, fundamentally, all of our bot platforms are taking spoken input, turning into text, and then processing it, and then providing a response back that gets interpreted and spoken back out as audio. So at first glance, it seems simple. Oh, I'll just use the same text processing, whether it was spoken or typed. But you quickly understand that you're really limiting yourself on both sides of the equation, both visually and audibly, to a least common denominator approach if you force feed them into the exact same interface for both kinds of input. Voice is different than text. When we see customers that are leveraging bot environments across both voice and text, we see different front ends. The pattern of questions is different. People can provide more complex responses as text than they will over audio. So we see a different style of how I ask questions back and what kind of detail I'm going to get from callers. The voice interaction has a style to it. So there's a little bit of an art of crafting the conversation. Also, our text-based platforms can have links and pictures and tables. I can push a link to a web page and have a whole page of information displayed as the answer to the question. I can't do that over the phone. I can read back a couple of pieces of data, but past that, just voice doesn't work. And so we very much can provide, in some cases, more data, more detail on text-based interactions than I would ever attempt to do over voice in this for the same kind of a response. And a lot of times we're in an omni-channel approach on a voice interaction, asking callers to, is it okay if I send you an SMS message with a link to more information or more detail? And using a second channel then to push an SMS link back to that customer. Or even pushing them into a web page for what we call visual IVR, where I move from a voice to a text-based interaction when I have more complex information to try to capture. I need the spelling of a name, for example. That's hard to do over voice. So using the right tool for the right job is an important part of determining what the interaction should be over voice and chat. And you can't blindly assume that people are going to speak the same questions that they type. So paying attention to those user interfaces are super important. But you'll find that a lot of the same interactions are there. Where's my order? Comes across as voice as I type. You know that that's a kind of transaction you need to automate. And all of your back-end connection and pulling data can be the same. You might pull more data over visual to represent it, but you still need some of that information on voice. So while there's a lot of synergies in doing those projects together or adding voice to an existing chat is an efficient process to step forward, it does require some pieces. And then the other part of it is the connection between automation and a human agent. Bots won't do everything. They need that back off into having a human help them when there's a more complex question than what they can handle. We never want to start a conversation over again when it goes from bot to agent. So in a voice component, we call that computer telephony integration, CTI, screen pop. We want to take the interaction that we've been able to handle. I've identified the caller, I know who they are. I want to get that information to my agent so the agent can continue the conversation forward and not start it all over again. So on voice-enabled systems, we need to watch out for that telephony integration. How do I get data from the automation environment into the telecom environment and to my agent so that I have a continuous call experience for my callers and it's not disjointed or interrupted as I move from automation to human if that's necessary for the interaction I'm running. On the chat side as well, we want to get the chat transcript and kind of that history over to the agent when they receive the chat interaction. So the agent can quickly get up to speed on where the customer is at, and again, continue the chat conversation forward, not ask the same questions that the bot already has. So you do that differently. There's different plumbing required to get those informations connected. But that's a huge part of making a voice interaction designed and special built and working to its peak efficiency. It requires some different design than doing a text-only solution.
So there are a couple more questions here from the audience here before we wrap up today. One's asking about what type of processes exist for the chatbot to detect the mood of the caller. Is there something, say, if someone sighs or shows some type of frustration or something, are we able to use that as like an escalation point, or where are we in sensing mood and being able to move those conversations based on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is really an example of sentiment analysis. So trying to understand the emotion of the utterances rather than just looking at the words, right? So trying to understand how the person is feeling as a way to kind of direct the conversation and maybe even, at some point escalate to a live agent if needed. So triggers can be automated. So, okay, if somebody's feeling frustrated, um, transfer to a live agent automatically, or you can offer up that option. For example, I sense that we're not quite able to help you, right, as a bot. Can I offer to transfer you to a live agent, for example? So these are just strategies that you can use to empathize with the user as a way to improve the user experience and to ultimately get the job done or provide the answers that they're looking for. So sentiment analysis has a lot to do with scoring, because sometimes it's really hard to know for sure how the person is feeling. So the sentiment analysis engine will assign a score to different emotions of the utterance. For example, 50% confidence level of frustration or 50% confidence level of happiness. And then you can write some business logic to address those kind of patterns. So if somebody's feeling happy, maybe you can empathize that they're happy as a way to empathize and to acknowledge that they're happy with the service or the quality of the interaction. If they're feeling frustrated or even angry, acknowledge that and help address that in an appropriate way. For example, offering to transfer a live agent.
Also, it can be very powerful if you detect emotion. You've got that sentiment defined, is using that as part of your routing logic for which agent should step in and help. Frustrated callers might be something that you give to a more experienced agent or agents that do better at handling upset customers. So not only can you drive what automation interaction, cut off retries, kind of, okay, I'm going to give up and get out because this customer is getting upset. But you can also use that information to figure out what the best agent is that I need to connect in and help this caller move forward.
So another question we have here from the audience is kind of around adoption. Like how do we see the end customer adapting to chatbots, especially voice-enabled chatbots that have been put into the various contact centers? Are they willing to use it? Do they accept the method of input, or what's that whole experience like?
Yeah, we've seen, especially on the voice side, when I open up the question and ask an interesting question to the caller, I get the caller hooked and engaged much more quickly. When it's, hi, how can I help you? It's like callers jump in and start answering those questions. It's not the same old experience or a list of menu options that they just start pressing 0 to 2 to get out of. We do see these environments picking up and getting more engagement from end users that are calling into the environments. Speech automation is so pervasive today in our world. People use it almost every day in some form or fashion. Having it available on the phone, speech is the new search. Those kinds of concepts we find a lot of success implementing for our customers.
What type of AI technologies exist today that detect the intents and the emotions? So going back to, the escalation question a moment ago, what really drives that? What's the technology behind it?
Right. So at Strebo, we use the IBM Watson APIs. So first, using the natural language processing engine of Watson to understand the intent behind the utterances. So is the person looking to open a bank account, or are they looking to speak to tech support? Um, those are kind of questions that you need natural language processing to be able to understand the intent behind it.
Yeah, the Watson toolkit is very powerful around having that sentiment analysis. And it's nice in that while you're running the automation components, sentiment is captured along the way as you go. Your confidence in that sentiment builds the more you interact with the end user. So it's just a data point that kind of builds over time and is available to you to tap into and use while you're in the middle of a dialogue. So it's something that is a nice add-on. It doesn't have to be in place up front for automation to work correctly, but it can be a powerful tool to make your customer service better by detecting and getting callers connected to people when you have frustrated callers.
One last question here from the audience before we get into, just final thoughts. Like, if a business is looking to take baby steps, right? Test out, is AI right for me? Is a chatbot, a virtual agent, something that's going to be viable for my contact center? What's the best approach in doing so? How do they get started?
We offer a lightweight workshop to engage with new customers to try to identify where these automation solutions would add value for a contact center. We go through a process of working with customers to understand who is contacting you, how are they contacting you, and what kinds of questions do they have. We then do an analysis of the environment, kind of what data is available and how does it persist that we can tap into to answer those questions. And through our experience at implementing these solutions for many different customers, can quickly identify where the best opportunities are for automation to be successful. I would certainly recommend pulling in somebody with concrete, tangible experience to help you get started. You'll figure it out eventually, but why bump your head 3 times when we can tell you when to duck? We can guide you down that path, pick use cases that are going to have a high rate of success based on what we've seen before, and make sure that you have your first steps be successful steps as you move forward in this process.
That wraps up most of the questions that we have rolling in for right now. Any parting thoughts here before we close out for the day?
I'll just say thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy day to um, come and listen. I'm happy to help anyone out there that is interested in figuring out, are these technologies for your business or how to apply them best. Please give us a call.
Thank you so much, everyone.